Alright, so here goes nothing. I don't even know where to start, but I guess the beginning would make the most sense. My wife, Emily, not her real name, and I have been married for 5 years. We were high school sweethearts, and people always told us we were relationship goals. I thought we had the kind of marriage other people envied, you know? A stable life, a cute little house, and decent careers. We weren't perfect by any means, but I figured the typical bumps in the road were just life. But over the last few months, something's been off. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She's been working more hours than usual, coming home exhausted, and barely acknowledging me. The sex? Non-existent. We hadn't had sex in over 2 months, and any time I brought it up, she'd say she was too tired or just not in the mood. The excuses piled up. She'd go out with her friends more often and stay out late, which wasn't something she used to do. When I asked her about it, she'd get defensive, like crazy defensive. I figured maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was the one who needed to chill. But here's where things got really weird. One night, she didn't come home until almost 3 a.m., claiming she was with her friend Sarah, another fake name. I didn't think much of it at first, but that night, I couldn't sleep. I started questioning everything in my head, and something just didn't sit right with me. Why would she be out so late? Why did her phone suddenly become glued to her hand? I should have trusted my gut from the start. The following weekend, I decided to test the waters a bit. I casually asked Emily if she had plans for the evening. She said she was going out with Sarah again, like it was no big deal. Her tone was so nonchalant, but something felt rehearsed. She quickly grabbed her purse, pecked me on the cheek, and walked out the door. I watched her drive off and thought, okay, I'm done pretending this is normal. I tried calling Sarah. Now, we're not exactly best friends or anything, but I got her number saved from a few gatherings we had in the past. My heart was racing when she picked up, but I played it cool. I asked her if she and Emily were heading out together tonight, trying not to sound suspicious. And guess what? Sarah had no idea what I was talking about. She mentioned she hadn't seen Emily in weeks. I felt my stomach drop. I managed to wrap up the call without letting on that I was freaking out, but at that moment, everything I'd been doubting felt real. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the lack of intimacy, it all started making sense. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof. I didn't want to go into that conversation looking like some paranoid husband with no evidence. So I decided to wait, keep observing, and hope I was wrong. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of everything Emily did. The way she would keep her phone face down on the table, how she'd step out of the room to take calls, and the way she avoided eye contact when I asked her about her day. I was spiraling internally, but I kept telling myself that maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for all this. One night, Emily was in the shower, and her phone buzzed. Normally, I'm not the kind of guy who snoops. We'd always had an open, trusting relationship, or so I thought. But this time, my curiosity got the better of me. I picked up her phone, hoping it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. The text on her lock screen was from someone named Jake, a name I'd never heard before. It was a simple message, "Can't wait to see you tonight." I felt a wave of nausea hit me, and my hand started to shake. I unlocked her phone. Thankfully, I knew her passcode, and the full conversation unraveled in front of me. Emily and Jake had been messaging back and forth for weeks. The texts were flirty, and it was clear that this wasn't just some innocent friendship. He called her babe, and they talked about their next meetup, which made it obvious that they'd been seeing each other behind my back. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I didn't even know who this guy was, but suddenly he was all I could think about. My mind was racing, filled with questions. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? Why didn't I see the signs sooner? I stood there, holding her phone, with the sound of the shower in the background, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. I stood there, frozen, just staring at the phone screen like it might somehow offer me answers. But all it did was fuel my anger. I had a million thoughts racing through my head, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. Emily got out of the shower, completely unaware of what I'd just uncovered. She was humming, drying her hair, acting like everything was normal. Meanwhile, I felt like I was about to explode. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed to approach it carefully. I couldn't just throw her phone in her face and demand answers without a plan. I had to stay calm, at least calmer than I felt. So, I decided to wait until she went to bed. I pretended everything was fine, though it took every ounce of self-control not to scream at her. Once she was asleep, I grabbed her phone again and started taking screenshots of the messages with Jake. I sent them to my own phone as evidence, because I knew she'd try to lie her way out of this if I didn't have something concrete. The messages made it painfully obvious that they'd been sleeping together. They talked about sneaking around, meeting at his place, and how amazing the sex was. My blood was boiling, and I had to leave the room before I woke her up by punching a wall or something. I went downstairs and sat in the dark, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't some nightmare I could wake up from. This was real. The woman I'd loved for years, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, was cheating on me. And for what? Some fling with some guy named Jake? I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept staring at the screenshots on my phone, my anger turning into hurt, then back into anger. I had to confront her, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep my composure when I did. The next morning, I barely held it together. Emily acted like everything was fine, made her coffee, scrolled through her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew her dirty little secret. I was fuming inside, but I forced myself to stay cool. I didn't want to blow up in the middle of breakfast. I decided that today was the day. No more waiting. No more second-guessing myself. I needed to confront her, and I needed to do it now. After she left for work, I called out sick. I couldn't focus on anything else anyway. I spent the whole day rehearsing how I'd approach it. I was torn between wanting to yell and scream and wanted to break down in tears. But I couldn't let her manipulate me. Not this time. When she came home, I was ready. She walked in, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and started talking about her day like nothing was wrong. The audacity of it made my skin crawl. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking just a little, "we need to talk." She froze for a second, her back to me, before turning around with that fake smile she's been putting on for weeks. "What's up, babe?" I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who the hell is Jake?" The color drained from her face. For a split second, she looked completely caught off guard. Then, she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "What? I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots, and shoved it in her face. "Don't lie to me, Emily. I've seen the messages." She stared at the screen for what felt like forever, her eyes widening as she realized there was no way to talk her way out of this one. But instead of apologizing or explaining, she just scoffed. "Oh, so you've been going through my phone? Nice, real mature, Ryan." She spat my name out like it was poison. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to turn this around on me? "Are you serious right now? You've been cheating on me, and you're mad because I found out?" She rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath. "You know what, Ryan? Maybe if you weren't so damn boring, I wouldn't have needed to find someone else to make me feel alive." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Her words hung in the air like a slap across the face. I stood there, stunned. Boring? That was her excuse? She looked at me like I was the problem, like I was the reason she cheated. It was unbelievable. "What the hell, Emily?" I could feel my voice rising, anger boiling over. "You're blaming me for your affair? For sleeping with some random guy?" She shrugged, her face twisted in this smug expression that made me want to scream. "I'm not blaming you, Ryan. I'm just saying things haven't been good between us for a while. You barely notice me anymore. You're always wrapped up in work or whatever, and honestly, I needed more. Jake, he made me feel special." There it was. She said his name like it was nothing. Like this whole thing was just some minor inconvenience in her perfect little life. I could feel my heart racing, my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists. This wasn't the Emily I thought I knew. This was someone cold, someone manipulative. "You needed more?" I shot back. "And what about me? What about the life we built together? You didn't think maybe we could, I don't know, talk about it? Work on our marriage? Instead, you just decided to go and mess around with some guy behind my back." She rolled her eyes again, like I was being dramatic. "Look, Ryan, it's not like I planned for this to happen. It just did. Things between Jake and me, they just felt right." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was standing there, casually justifying her affair like it was some kind of inevitable thing. Like I should have expected it. "So that's it then?" I asked, my voice quiet now, the anger starting to give way to exhaustion. "You just decided that this felt right, And I'm supposed to accept that? She sighed, clearly annoyed with the conversation. Ryan, I didn't want to hurt you, but maybe this is what we need. Maybe we've been pretending for too long. Pretending? I couldn't even find the words to respond. Everything she said just made me feel like I didn't know her at all. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was heartbroken. I stood there, speechless, as she casually dismantled everything we'd built. How long had she felt this way? Had our whole marriage been a lie? Was I just the guy she settled for until something better came along? Pretending. I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Pretending to what, Emily? To love me? She looked away, and for the first time during this whole disaster, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I don't know, Ryan. Maybe. I mean, I love you, but I don't think I'm in love with you anymore. Things have changed. That hit me like a freight train. I felt my heart sink, like the ground was disappearing beneath me. Everything she was saying, the way she was saying it, it felt so calculated, so cold. And the worst part? I believed her. She wasn't in love with me anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. So, what then? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and disbelief. You've just been waiting for the right time to leave? Or were you planning on keeping this thing with Jake going behind my back indefinitely? Emily shifted her weight, crossing her arms again. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. I let out a hollow laugh. You haven't figured it out yet? Wow. Great. So you just decided to cheat on me while you figure it out. She gave me a frustrated look, like I was the one being unreasonable. Look, Ryan, I didn't want to hurt you. I was confused, okay? I didn't know what I wanted. And then Jake. Don't. I interrupted her, my voice sharp. Don't say his name. Not in this house. Emily's face twisted in irritation again, but she didn't argue. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, both of us trapped in the weight of everything that had just been laid bare. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to speak first. She was waiting for me to say something, probably expecting me to break down, beg her to stay, or maybe even get over it. But I wasn't sure I had any words left. I felt numb, like everything was just crashing down around me, and I couldn't stop it. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Emily finally spoke again. Her voice was softer, almost like she was trying to sound reasonable. Ryan, maybe we just need some space. We've both been stressed, and I think we've been drifting apart for a while now. Maybe some time apart will give us clarity. Clarity? She was talking like this was some kind of mutual decision, like we were both unhappy, but I wasn't the one sneaking around with someone else. I wasn't the one lying, but I was too exhausted to argue. Space. I repeated, feeling like I was outside of my own body, just watching this train wreck unfold. What exactly does space mean to you, Emily? You move out. You move in with Jake? Is that your idea of clarity? She narrowed her eyes, her expression hardening. This isn't about Jake. Don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be. I couldn't believe the nerve of her. Not about Jake? I snapped. You've been sleeping with him. How is this not about him? You've turned our marriage into a damn joke, Emily. And now you want to talk about space and clarity like this is some kind of respectable, mutual decision? You cheated. You broke us. Her face flushed with anger, and she took a step closer, her voice rising. You think I wanted things to turn out like this? You think this is fun for me, Ryan? It's not like I've had the perfect marriage either. You've been distant for months, barely paying attention to me. You don't even look at me the way you used to. I felt my jaw clench. So, that's it? I didn't pay enough attention to you. So you went and found someone who would? You decided screwing around was the answer? She rolled her eyes, exasperated. I'm not saying it's right, okay? I'm just saying I was lonely. And Jake, he was there when you weren't. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her excuses, her attempts to justify it. It was like she genuinely thought this made sense. Like I was the one who drove her into someone else's arms. I shook my head, trying to hold on to what little composure I had left. This isn't my fault, Emily, I said, my voice tight. You had a choice, and you chose to cheat. Don't put this on me. She didn't respond. Instead, she just looked away, like she was already done with the conversation. Like she'd made up her mind about everything, and this was just an annoying formality. The silence between us was thick, heavier than anything I'd ever felt. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing there was no way back. I watched Emily as she stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze, and it was like I didn't even recognize her anymore. This woman, the person I thought I'd spend my life with, was a stranger to me now. "I can't do this," I finally said, my voice barely steady. "I can't stay in a marriage where I'm just an option, where I'm not enough." "You made your choice, Emily. You made it when you started seeing him." She looked up at me then, her face hardening again. "So that's it? You're giving up? You're just going to throw everything away because of one mistake?" I couldn't help but laugh, but it wasn't out of humor. It was bitter, hollow. One mistake? Emily, this wasn't a one-time thing. This was weeks of lying, sneaking around, sleeping with someone else. That's not a mistake. That's a choice you kept making, over and over again. I don't even know how long it's been going on, and honestly, I don't think I want to know. She shook her head, frustrated. I don't know what you want me to say, Ryan. I didn't want it to come to this, but maybe you're right. Maybe we've been holding on to something that isn't working anymore. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. There was no way I was going to cry in front of her. Not now. Not after everything. "So what, you think the answer is to walk away? Just like that?" She shrugged, and her indifference was like a knife in my chest. "Maybe. I mean, what's left here? We're both miserable." Miserable. That word hit me hard. Were we really both miserable? Or was that just her trying to justify what she'd done? Sure, we'd had our issues, but I didn't think we were at the point where this was the only option. But then again, maybe I'd been fooling myself all along. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. "Maybe there's nothing left." I hated saying it. I hated how final it felt. But deep down, I knew that staying together after this, after what she'd done, after everything she'd said, wasn't an option. There was no going back. Emily didn't say anything. She just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to make the next move. But I had nothing left to give her. All I felt was emptiness. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, waiting for some sign that maybe, just maybe, she regretted it. That she'd show some kind of emotion. Anything to tell me that what we had wasn't completely worthless to her. But all I saw was indifference. Her arms were still crossed, her face blank, like she was already halfway out the door in her mind. "Is that it then?" I asked, the exhaustion clear in my voice. "You're not even going to fight for this?" She sighed, clearly irritated now. "What do you want me to do, Ryan? Beg for forgiveness? Cry and say, I'll never do it again? What's the point? You've already made up your mind." "I made up my mind?" I shot back, incredulous. "No, you made this decision the second you decided to cheat. You killed our marriage the moment you chose to go behind my back with Jake. Don't act like this is all on me." Her expression didn't change. "Look, I'm not saying I'm innocent, okay? I know I messed up, but what do you want from me? I can't change what happened. And to be honest, maybe we both need something different." There it was again, her attempt to turn this into something mutual, something that we both somehow wanted. I could feel my blood boiling again, but at the same time, I felt so incredibly tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the games, tired of being made to feel like I was the one who wasn't enough. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice quiet now. "You're really ready to just throw it all away?" 5 years, Emily. We've been together for 5 years. She hesitated for a moment, and for a second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. But then she looked down, shook her head, and said, "Maybe it's for the best." That was it, the final nail in the coffin. Any hope I had of saving this, of trying to rebuild the trust, shattered right there in that moment. I couldn't believe it. She was really done, and in that instant, I realized I was too. "I'll pack my things," I said, my voice hollow. "I'll leave tonight." Emily didn't try to stop me. She didn't beg, didn't plead. She just nodded and said, "That's probably for the best." I walked upstairs in a daze, feeling like I was on autopilot. The weight of what had just happened was starting to crush me, but I couldn't break down. Not yet. Not until I was out of this house, away from her, away from the life we had built together. Well, the life I thought we had built. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing clothes in it. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sound of my stuff being hastily shoved into bags. Emily didn't come upstairs. She didn't check on me. I wasn't sure what I expected from her, But the fact that she wasn't trying to talk, to fix anything, just confirmed that I was making the right choice. This was over. As I packed, memories flashed through my mind. All the moments that once meant something to me now felt hollow. Our wedding day, the first time we got the keys to this house, the nights we stayed up late talking about the future. What had any of it really meant? Was it just a lie the whole time? Had she been pretending to love me while secretly searching for an escape? The worst part was how fast it had all fallen apart. Just a few days ago, I was still trying to convince myself that we were fine, that I was just imagining things. Now here I was, packing up my life in the span of a few hours because she'd chosen some other guy over me. When I finally zipped up my suitcase, I stood there for a moment, looking around the room. Our room. The bed we'd shared for years. It felt so foreign to me now, like it belonged to someone else. I couldn't stand being in there another second. I grabbed my bags, walked downstairs, and saw Emily sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She barely even glanced up as I passed by. "I'm going," I said, my voice flat. "Okay," she replied, not even looking up from her screen. I stood there for a second, waiting for something, but there was nothing. No apology, no goodbye. Just okay. And that was it. I walked out the door, closing it behind me, feeling a strange mix of relief and crushing sadness all at once. I was free of her lies, but I was also walking away from the life I thought we had, the life I thought I wanted. I got into my car and just sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me together. I stared at the house, our house, through the windshield, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like I was leaving behind more than just bricks and mortar. I was leaving behind a version of myself that believed in forever, that thought love was enough. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going or what I'd do next. My mind was racing, but at the same time, I felt numb, like I was outside of my own body. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all swirling around inside me, but I couldn't process any of it. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there. Not in that house, not with her. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. It felt final, like the closing chapter of a book I didn't want to read anymore. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, I tried to think of where I could go. My parents lived a few hours away, but I didn't want to show up on their doorstep like some broken mess. My best friend, Chris, would let me crash at his place, but I wasn't ready to talk about everything. Not yet. I ended up pulling into a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I parked in the far corner and just sat there, staring blankly at the neon sign flickering in the window. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, but I ignored it. I didn't care who it was. I couldn't deal with anything right now. After what felt like hours, I finally forced myself out of the car and into the diner. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh, too bright, like they didn't belong in my world right now. I slid into a booth by the window and stared at the menu, though I wasn't hungry. I just needed to be anywhere but alone in that car, with my thoughts eating me alive. The waitress came over, her smile polite but indifferent. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yeah, thanks," I muttered, barely able to make eye contact. As she walked away, I pulled out my phone, half expecting a text from Emily. Part of me stupidly thought she might have messaged me, asking me to come back, to work things out. But there was nothing from her. Just a message from Chris, checking in. "Yo man, everything okay? You've been quiet." I stared at the message for a while, not knowing how to respond. How do you tell someone your wife's been cheating on you with some guy named Jake? How do you explain that your whole life just fell apart in a single night? I couldn't bring myself to type the words. I wasn't ready to say them out loud. Not yet. I sat there, staring at the screen, the little blinking cursor mocking me. I wanted to tell Chris everything, to unload all the shit that was building up inside me, but I just couldn't. It still felt unreal, like this couldn't possibly be happening to me. Instead, I just typed out, "Not really. I'll call you later," and hit send. The waitress came back and set the coffee down in front of me. I thanked her quietly, and she walked away, giving me space. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, but I wasn't really drinking it. I just sat there, numb, my mind racing in circles, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. How had I not seen this coming? Were there signs I'd missed? Had I just been blind to it all because I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of betraying me like this? I replayed the last few months in my head. Her late nights, the sudden distance between us, the excuses, the lies. I felt so stupid. How could I have let this happen? But then again, maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe even if I'd confronted her earlier, things would have turned out the same. Maybe she was always going to choose him. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I took a sip of the coffee, hoping it would settle my nerves, but all it did was bring me back to the harsh reality of the situation. There was no escaping it. I was alone in a diner at 2 in the morning because my wife was screwing some other guy. And worse than that, she didn't seem to care. I glanced down at my phone again, half expecting to see a text from her, but there was still nothing. Not a single word. It was like she'd already moved on, like I didn't matter. After everything, after 5 years of marriage, she couldn't even be bothered to send a message asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay, and she knew that, but she didn't care. I sat back in the booth, feeling the weight of it all settle on my chest. It was like I was suffocating under the realization that I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving behind the life I thought we were building together. The dreams, the plans, the future we used to talk about, all of it was gone. And now, I didn't know what the hell to do. As I sat there, staring at my reflection in the diner window, the reality of it all started to sink in deeper. I was officially starting over. But what the hell did that even mean? I felt lost, like I had no direction. The life I'd built with Emily was everything to me. And now that it was shattered, I had nothing left to hold on to. The waitress came by again, refilling my coffee. She gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't say anything. I appreciated that. No small talk, no pretending like I was okay. She probably saw people like me all the time. People who came in during the middle of the night, looking for a place to sit quietly with their thoughts. I took another sip of the coffee and pulled out my phone again. Chris had responded. Damn, man, that doesn't sound good. Want to grab a drink or something? Part of me wanted to meet up with him, to just have someone around who didn't make me feel like I was drowning. But the thought of explaining everything made me hesitate. The shame, the humiliation, I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I typed out a quick response. Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. I set my phone down and stared at it for a few seconds, wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. The fact that Emily hadn't even bothered to check on me was eating away at me. How could she be so heartless? I wasn't expecting her to grovel, but a part of me thought maybe, just maybe, she'd care enough to see how I was doing. Instead, she was probably with Jake right now. The thought made my stomach turn. It was crazy how quickly everything had unraveled. Just a few days ago, I was trying to convince myself that the distance between us was temporary, that we could fix it. Now I was sitting alone, my marriage in pieces, while she acted like it didn't matter. It made me question everything. Had she ever really loved me, or was it just convenient until she found something else? I took a deep breath, trying to steady the flood of emotions. I couldn't keep spiraling like this, couldn't keep letting my mind go back to her and him. I had to figure out what to do next. Sitting here, drowning in my misery, wasn't going to solve anything. But where the hell was I supposed to go from here? I stayed in that diner for what felt like hours, just letting the night stretch on. The coffee went cold, but I didn't bother asking for a refill. I was too caught up in my thoughts. The reality of my situation kept hitting me in waves. Emily wasn't going to call, she wasn't going to apologize, and she wasn't going to fix this. It was over. I kept thinking, is this really how it ends? In a cheap diner at 2 in the morning, with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart? I couldn't sit there forever, though. Eventually, I had to leave, so I stood up, paid the bill, and walked back to my car. The night air hit me, cold and sharp, and for a second, I just stood there, staring at the empty streets. I still didn't know where to go. I wasn't ready to face Chris or my parents, and going back to Emily wasn't even an option. So, I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I drove. I didn't know where I was headed. I just needed to keep moving to avoid sitting still long enough for the emotions to swallow me whole. I drove aimlessly through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, past places that were all closed up for the night. It was strangely comforting being out there on my own, the hum of the engine, the only sound breaking the silence. I thought about all the times I'd tried to fix things between us, all the little moments when I'd noticed something was off and brushed it aside. I kept wondering, what if I'd pushed harder? What if I confronted her sooner? But then I realized none of it would have mattered. She made her choice. And maybe, deep down, I'd known for a while that things were broken beyond repair. After driving for what felt like forever, I finally pulled into a motel parking lot. It wasn't anything special, just a basic place on the side of the highway, but it was somewhere to crash for the night. I couldn't sleep in my car, not like this. I needed a bed, even if it was a crappy one. The motel clerk didn't ask any questions when I checked in, just handed me the key with a bored look on his face. I made my way to the room, tossed my suitcase onto the bed, and collapsed into a chair by the window. As I stared out at the dark, empty parking lot, the weight of everything hit me again. I was really on my own now. No more pretending. No more hoping that maybe she'd change her mind. This was it. The end. Sitting in that motel room, surrounded by the cheap furniture and the faint hum of the highway outside, the finality of it all started sinking in even deeper. This wasn't just some fight I could walk off, not something that could be fixed with a few apologies or a couple of days apart. This was my life unraveling. And for the first time in years, I didn't have Emily to fall back on. That realization stung more than anything else. I stood up and walked over to the small bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, hoping it would clear my head. But all I saw in the mirror was a guy who'd been completely blindsided. I looked wrecked. My eyes were tired, dark circles forming underneath. And I hadn't even realized how drained I felt until I saw myself like this. I hadn't brought much with me, just a few clothes thrown into a suitcase in the heat of the moment. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone again. No new messages. Of course not. She was probably with him, right now, doing whatever it is they do when I'm not around. The thought made my skin crawl. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to figure out how we'd gotten here. I knew things hadn't been perfect between us lately, but I didn't think it was this bad. And the way she acted when I confronted her, so cold, so indifferent, made me realize how far apart we'd grown without me even noticing. Had she been checked out for months? Years? Was I just some placeholder until she found something more exciting? I couldn't help but feel like a fool. All those moments I'd spent trying to fix things, trying to keep our marriage together, while she was probably sneaking off to see Jake. What an idiot I'd been, thinking we could work through it. Thinking she still cared. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through old photos. Pictures of us smiling, laughing, happy. Or at least, that's what it looked like. Now those memories felt tainted, like they belonged to someone else, to a different life. I wondered how much of it had been real. How long had she been faking it, pretending everything was okay, while she was slowly pulling away? I threw the phone down onto the bed, frustrated and heartbroken. There were no answers, no explanations that could make sense of this. She had lied over and over, and there was no going back. I knew that now. As much as it hurt, as much as I wished things could be different, the truth was staring me in the face. My marriage was dead. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything settle into my chest. I had no idea what to do next. It's strange when your whole world falls apart in a matter of hours. I had no roadmap for this, no guide on how to move forward. All I knew was that the life I'd built, the future I thought I had, was gone. And it wasn't coming back. I thought about calling Chris or my parents, just to hear someone's voice, someone who wasn't Emily. But I still wasn't ready to explain it. How do you tell people that the person you trusted most in the world had ripped your heart out and didn't even care? That she was off with someone else, probably laughing, while I was here trying to figure out how to breathe without everything hurting? I pulled the pillow over my face, trying to shut out the world, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, calm, indifferent, like this was all just business as usual. It wasn't the Emily I knew. Or maybe it was, and I'd just been blind to it for so long. The worst part was the memories. Every little thing we'd shared kept flooding back. The way she used to smile when I came home, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch. All of that felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone who no longer existed. I wasn't sure when it had all changed, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost her. Or maybe she'd never really been mine. I couldn't stay in that motel room any longer. It felt too small, too suffocating. I needed air, space to think, or at least to stop thinking for a while. I grabbed my jacket and walked out into the night, the cold air hitting my face, waking me up just a little. There was nothing around but the hum of the highway and the dim glow of the motel's neon sign. It was like I was the only person in the world right then, completely alone. I walked aimlessly for a while, my feet carrying me farther from the motel. I didn't have a destination in mind, but that didn't matter. I just needed to keep moving, needed to get away from the thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. Eventually, I ended up by a gas station, the kind that's open all night, but looks like it hasn't seen a customer in hours. I walked inside, grabbed a bottle of water, and paid the bored cashier who barely looked up from his magazine. I wanted to say something, anything, just to remind myself that I was still here, still a person. But the words wouldn't come. As I walked back to the motel, I realized something. I was going to be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Emily had made her choice, and it was clear there was no saving us. I could feel the anger and sadness bubbling under the surface, but beneath it all was the first flicker of acceptance. This was my reality now, and somehow, I'd figure out how to live with it. By the time I made it back to the motel, I felt slightly lighter, like the walk, the cold air, and the time away from that suffocating room had given me just a sliver of clarity. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the bottle of water in my hand, feeling the weight of the evening, of the last few months, crashing down in a different way. For the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to start over. A real clean slate. I didn't have to pretend things were okay anymore. I didn't have to keep fighting for a marriage that had already fallen apart long before I'd seen those texts. The truth was that Emily had left our marriage emotionally long before she physically betrayed me. I had been holding on to something that was already dead. The painful part wasn't just the betrayal. It was realizing that I'd been alone in this for a while, trying to fix something that only mattered to me. And now, I didn't have to do that anymore. There was some strange comfort in knowing that the worst had already happened. But that didn't mean the pain was gone. Far from it. The hurt was still there, deep and raw, like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I thought about her with Jake, about how easily she dismissed our life together, and the anger flared back up. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through, after the years we'd spent building a life, she just tossed it away like it didn't mean anything. I lay back down, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, and let my mind wander. I had to let go of this anger, but it wasn't going to be easy. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. Every time I thought I had a grip on it, it slipped through my fingers. Still, for the first time since I'd walked out of that house, I felt a glimmer of something else, freedom. As strange as it sounded, the finality of it all meant that I didn't have to keep fighting for something that wasn't worth it anymore. I didn't have to try to win Emily back. I didn't have to pretend everything was okay. I could just leave it behind. Of course, that didn't mean the road ahead would be easy. But at least now, I knew where I stood. I knew I couldn't fix what was broken between us, and maybe that was okay. As I lay there, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the weight of everything started to shift. It wasn't that the pain was gone, or that the betrayal didn't sting. It still hurt like hell. But the realization that I didn't have to fight for Emily anymore, that I didn't have to try to fix something that had already crumbled, brought a strange kind of peace. It was like I could finally stop holding my breath. I thought about the next steps, the practical stuff. I'd have to figure out living arrangements, talk to a lawyer about the divorce, tell my family. God, that was going to be a whole other mess. My parents had always loved Emily, and I dreaded the moment I'd have to explain to them that their perfect daughter-in-law had been sleeping with another man. I could already hear my mom's voice, full of disbelief. Emily? No, she wouldn't do that. There has to be some mistake. But there wasn't. I had the proof right in my phone. Those screenshots, the brutal evidence that the life they thought we had was just a lie. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion wash over me. There were so many things I still had to deal with. But at that moment, I didn't have the energy. I just needed to take it one step at a time. There was no sense in trying to untangle everything all at once. First, I needed to figure out where I was going to stay long-term. Chris had offered to let me crash at his place, but I didn't want to impose for too long. I grabbed my phone, opening up a real estate app, Scrolling through rental listings, I realized how much of a fresh start I really needed. A new place, a new routine, something that was mine, where the ghost of my failed marriage wouldn't linger in every corner. I needed somewhere that wasn't tied to memories of her. As I scrolled, I caught myself thinking about the future for the first time in what felt like forever. A life without Emily, without the weight of trying to make something work that had been doomed from the start. It wasn't exactly comforting, but it wasn't terrifying either. It just was, maybe I could rebuild, piece by piece. Not today, and not tomorrow, but eventually. I booked a viewing for a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a place to rebuild, to figure out who I was without her. The next morning came quietly, sunlight filtering through the thin motel curtains. It was like the world hadn't changed at all, but everything felt different to me. I wasn't waking up in my home. I wasn't waking up next to Emily. Instead, I was in this cheap motel, my whole life packed into a suitcase on the floor. It was strange how calm I felt considering everything. Maybe it was because I knew there was no more pretending, no more trying to save something that had already crumbled. I grabbed my phone and saw a few messages from Chris, checking in again, but still nothing from Emily. Part of me had been stupidly hoping that maybe she'd reach out, that there'd be some acknowledgement of the wreckage she'd caused. But of course, there was nothing. Not even a "how are you doing?" It was almost like I didn't exist to her anymore. I texted Chris back, letting him know I'd be okay and that I'd call him later. Then I pulled up the listing for the apartment I'd found the night before. It was small, a one-bedroom in an older building, but it was available immediately, and that's what I needed, a fresh start. Something that wasn't tied to Emily or the life we'd shared. I scheduled a viewing for later that day, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I had a sense of direction. I checked out of the motel, tossing my bags into the car, and drove across town. The city looked different in the daylight, but not in the way that made you feel like things were better. Just clearer. I had spent so long ignoring the cracks in my marriage, thinking that love and effort were enough to hold it all together, that I didn't see what was really happening. But now I had to face it. I was on my own, and I had to figure out how to move forward. When I pulled up to the apartment building, I took a deep breath. It wasn't anything special, just an old brick building with a few units, but it felt like a new beginning. I met the landlord, walked through the space, and it hit me that this could be mine. No memories of Emily, no reminders of what I'd lost. Just a blank slate. I signed the lease right there, feeling an odd mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I had a place to call my own, a space where I could start to rebuild my life. Sadness because this wasn't how things were supposed to turn out. I had planned a future with Emily, but now I was planning a life without her. As I left the building, keys in hand, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It felt like it was for so long, but now I saw it differently. This was the beginning of something new. Painful, yes, but a beginning nonetheless. I didn't know what the future held, and that was terrifying, but also strangely freeing. I was no longer tethered to the past, no longer stuck in a marriage that had long since died. I had a new place, a new life to build, and no more lies weighing me down. Maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay after all.